not to bring down the tone too much, but I did want to get into the Armie Hammer Cannibal accusations because as Armie Hammer has come out recently, he's done the gamut of interviews with Piers Morgan, Bill Maher, like 3 or 4 other podcasts I've heard him on, and I've actually spoke to Jamie Kirchick, who is an investigative journalist, and he was the first one to do a print interview with Armie Hammer. Jamie spoke to Armie out in LA, I think it was maybe a year and a half ago, and when he spoke to Armie, that was the first time that I saw when I was reading Jamie's article that Armie Hammer was talking about how big the BDSM and kink played a role in the accusations, and that there were a lot of things that were provided in documentaries about Armie Hammer and provided to the media without the context that this was an agreement between two people, and that it was a consensual BDSM kink acts, according to Armie Hammer. And so I just wanted to provide some context before we get into it. So just as a summary, a few years ago, Armie Hammer was canceled from Hollywood for accusations of being a cannibal and a sexual abuser. And since then, it's come to light through the work of Jamie Kirchick and recent Armie Hammer interviews that there's so much more nuance to the story that was maliciously excluded, in my opinion, from the original accusations. And the entire text conversations show the fully willing and excited partners of Armie Hammer reciprocating and even initiating the same types of texts that Armie was canceled for. And there's a quote that I jotted down from Piers Morgan where Armie Hammer says, he says, quote, "In my sexual relationships with people, I was very cognizant and very aware about presenting that these are my desires. These are my kinks. Do any of these sound good to you? Let's move slowly through this. If there's anything you want to try, we can try them, and we'll make sure we do it safely and with communication and with healthy boundaries. There was nothing to be gained from me having a sexual experience that my partner didn't appreciate or enjoy." And then something else that came out was that Armie Hammer, was a sexual abuser because he was into rape role play. And so he commented on that as well, where he said, quote, "It was not only with her knowledge, but also with her planning. She said, 'Meet me at this Starbucks and follow me home and then come in the door and do this.' It was even awkward and clumsy, and it was something we tried once and she wanted to try, and I wanted to be an accommodating partner." And he talks about using safe words like orange meant pause, or I'm feeling overwhelmed, but I'm still into it. And then red meant stop completely. And there's other texts from Armie Hammer that we can get into in a little bit. But I just wanted to pause there to ask you, with everything that's come out and just like recent comments from Armie Hammer, and I'm obviously, and I'm not expecting you to have watched the full interviews. This is just slight context, and anyone who's listening to this can check out the Piers Morgan interview, the Bill Maher interview, and just decide for yourself what you think about what Armie Hammer is saying. But just from this extra context here that was not available when the HBO documentary came out and when he was canceled from Hollywood, what are your thoughts on the Armie Hammer situation, the accusations, and then this sort of rebirth of him giving context with the kink BDSM role play being behind a lot of the texts that were leaked?
Yeah, I actually didn't know that much about this. So again, in a situation where it's one person said one thing, one person said another thing, we never really know exactly what's going on. And obviously, if these things happened without the person's consent, or if boundaries were not kept, that's a huge issue. But if information was withheld, talking about the fact that, there were boundaries that were set up and these people did completely know what was going on, participate, willingly consent, then obviously it's really a shame that information wasn't part of what was going on, because if two people are willing participants in consensual play, then it shouldn't be an issue. I don't know how all of that started. Like, were there just accusations against him that people said that?
So from my memory, from when I was preparing for the interview with Jamie Kirchick, and if you search Jamie Kirchick, Armie Hammer, he has a 30-minute read online that people can check out where he has context from Armie and then some context from the accusers through the outlets that they came out to, and then the full texts that were shared between Armie Hammer and his accusers. And I remember, and I could be wrong about this, but I think it was the girl Effie who came out and accused Armie Hammer of sexual abuse and taking advantage of her, crossing consent lines. And she provided text messages and DMs to show this. And then other accusers came out. There's another woman, Courtney, that came out and also showed texts that ended up being partial texts. Everyone piled on. A lot of these texts were mentioning cannibalism and I want to eat you. And the media took that and ran with it. And, you know, as they do with a lot of things without context, but that seem like very extreme. It's just like Armie Hammer's a cannibal. Does Armie Hammer eat people? All this stuff. And then, to my understanding, he just kind of went away. The LAPD didn't end up charging him with anything. The case didn't go anywhere, but he just went away for a long time and then came back a few months ago into the public eye and now giving very long form interviews on Piers Morgan, on Bill Maher, on just like a lot of long form podcasts, just talking about very awkward things and a lot of the just like the things from that were sensual to like things that were awkward or even funny, and things that were like just walking people through like his mindset, why this was occurring. And obviously there's multiple parts to every single story. Yeah. So you can't just take one person's word for it. But I appreciated the context that he was providing with, you know, this is what I was thinking, or, you know, I sent these texts when I was inebriated and sitting in a hotel room alone, and I was getting positive feedback. So I just, you know, I just ran with it, and it was what it was. But yeah, I believe it started with that first girl, Effie, coming out back in like 2017 or whenever it was. And then that kind of just started the whole shitstorm.
Yeah, I mean, again, no idea. I'm sure if somebody's coming forward, then whatever their claim is needs to be taken seriously. If there was no follow-up, you know, that doesn't mean anything either way. And it's a tricky situation, because as somebody who's been doing this for a long time, even when you agree to something, sometimes you do it and then afterwards you realize, hey, that was too much. I agreed but shouldn't. Or in maybe one of these cases where they're saying I said no and it went further, and the other person's like, well, I just kind of went with it. You know, whenever you have this sort of a dynamic, it can be very, very tricky to make sure that everybody stays within the boundaries that are set, and understanding that if boundaries are crossed, you know, what happens in that scenario. Because sometimes it happens, like people coming into the industry, sometimes they ask me, like, how do you know, like, if you're going to cross the boundary on somebody if they don't know what their boundary is? You know,
that's a really good point.
It's a very good question.
That applies to anything,
right? Yeah. So how do you know until you potentially do it and potentially cross that boundary? So you have to communicate enough with the person to know if they are wanting to push their boundaries, if they're wanting to find out what those boundaries are, that there's a lot of communication, and especially if a boundary is crossed, that they feel very comfortable saying, okay, we did this. That was not good for me. Yeah. I do not want to do this again. And for the person to be okay enough to be willing to continue, because you're chancing it. Like if you have a bad experience or if something pushes you or is really negative, you might not want to go back to that. So it could be really, scary stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as a dom, when you're coming in to a session and you have a client that has pre-established boundaries, and you know that you're starting at a point and you still haven't hit the boundary yet, but like you said, boundaries can be have a life of their own depending on how you're feeling that day or what you've experienced, emotions, things like that. It's shifting. How do you, as a professional, sort of manage the lines with the shifting boundaries of a client on a particular day? Are you checking in? Like you have a set time, like every 10 minutes, I'm going to just check in, even if the client doesn't say this is, something I don't want, or is it more just like reading body language, reading verbal language?
It really depends on the person for sure. And one thing that I say across the board is, scenes and sessions and playtime get better the more you know the person. So the more you know them, the more you know how to navigate situations, and the more comfortable you also feel pushing boundaries. Sometimes people come to me, they're like, I want to try this, I want to try that, I've never done this. I was like, whoa. I don't know you. And you're asking me to do all these things that you have never had happen to you before. Maybe this is way off of into left field for you. You don't know that. Like, we have to start here. I get to know you. I get to know your body language, how you respond. I get feedback from that. Like, okay, this is what we did. How was all of that? And then I can internalize, like, this is how they responded. All of this was okay. Or something isn't okay. And I learned to pick up what wasn't okay. And we talk about that. Oh, that was too much. Yeah. So after you know all of this stuff and you're way more confident in being able to read the person and their nonverbal cues as well as their verbal cues and their body language and their breathing and all of the other things, then I feel more comfortable pushing boundaries.
Yeah.
I really don't like when people come to me and they're like, I just want all, everything.
Yeah, all or nothing. Yeah.
And, I've had people come and it's like a first time encounter. They're like, well, I really want to be pushed, and the past 3 experiences I've had I don't feel that they've really gone there, and I really want to do that. And so you're like, okay, like let's do this, and have that understanding. And sometimes it happens, and the person in this one instance was like, this is too much, and we stopped about 15 minutes in, and they're like, it's not your fault. I asked for all of this. You did it perfectly, and it was too much. Yeah. And so then we had like 3 or 4 other scenes, and it took us a while to find the middle ground. So it was like we went back and forth.
Repetition.
And it was like, they didn't consider them particularly successful sessions, whatever that means. I said, you have too many expectations if you think something's successful or not. It should just be about the experience. And I was like, I considered them all very successful because we learned, and you learned. What you want, what you don't want, and you kind of stuck with it. If you would have went to another person, you're starting from ground zero.
Yeah.
So it really is that trust building and getting to know each other that is essential. So for some of my scenes, I don't really have to check in. Like, I know just based on what they're doing if it's going to be too much, if it's getting too much. And then with other people, I'll just check in if I think checking in needs to be, if they just seem something seems a little off, be like, are you okay? Try not to do that too much, because a lot of people really want to feel like they're in the space and, they don't have control and, you're guiding everything. But sometimes it's just really necessary to check in and make sure things are okay.